And begin. Can I just get some thumbs up to see that you can see the beginning slide for the supportive services only standalone deep dive? Fabulous. Thank you. Well, good morning. Thank you for joining us. I am Kelsey Beckmeyer, the COC manager with KCRHA, and this morning is focused on deep dive to understand what supportive services only standalone projects are, what some of the rules regarding those projects are, um, some potential models of what standalone projects can look like, and some of the other kind of HUD rules and expectations. I do want to begin by stating that there is currently a preliminary injunction relating to the FY25 NOFO. HUD has been mandated to kind of stay the FY25 NOFO and to follow the process for FY24-25 for the renewals. So anything relating to the NOFO is currently on pause and not moving forward. Um, there are materials due to the court today around how HUD anticipates moving forward with processing FY25 renewals. Um, and if you've noticed, I've stated renewals a lot. We don't have really any clear picture on what the process regarding new projects will be with the preliminary injunction. So this session is really for informational, for thinking about program design, once we do have further information from the court on how to proceed with any new projects. So just want to make sure that that is stated and clear. As we get more information, we will provide those updates to you all. But this session today is really informational purposes. So we'll cover a number of things around what support services only is, core requirements, both at the COC level and kind of individual program level, eligible activities and cost structures, discussion on match documentation and policies, coordination and requirements regarding HMIS and coordinated entry, and then what other reporting requirements and expectations are. So support services only are projects that do just that. They provide just the supportive services. Um, they are designed for families and individuals experiencing homelessness. So not necessarily targeted at those who are currently in housing projects. Um, and the focus is really on outreach, engagement, and referral to housing or other types of services. Um, support services only may not provide housing or housing assistance to the same participants. So there cannot be a support services only project that is operating in tandem with a permanent supportive housing project, for example. If you wanted to have support services funded, it would need to be part of a permanent supportive housing project. If anyone is unmuted, if you could please mute just so background noise isn't there. Thank you so much. So really that support services is targeted at those who are currently experiencing homelessness, whether that be sheltered or unsheltered homelessness. A huge core that will be emphasized kind of over and over, particularly by HUD, is that this is not a housing project. There is not housing assistance that is provided through a support services only project. There can be supports to gain and access housing, but not actually funding of housing in this type of a project. This matters because it can result in either ineligible costs that are being paid for and findings from HUD. So wanting to be really clear around these distinctions that you are not operating or funding housing. Um, I will again just be very reiterative of this, that you are not providing housing and support services only. There's a good HUD resource that I have linked here that you'll be able to access, that helps you look at whether or not the program that you are operating or designing or thinking about would be considered a support services only or a housing component project. This is a really good decision tool just to help verify and validate what that classification is, to ensure that what you're putting forth and what you're thinking about funding as support services only really is support services only. So who can be served through support services only? Again, individuals and families who are currently experiencing homelessness. This is for folks who are just receiving services and not getting housing assistance in that same project. Um, there is a caveat that current residents of permanent housing who were homeless in the prior 6 months can be served with support services only. Um, but it just has to be very clear that they were previously homeless in the prior 6 months. Um, and that has to be documented and tracked. So if you are considering providing support services, for current residents, so this may be, that you are supporting a household, they move into housing and you want to continue providing some support to them, you do need to show that the prior 6 months they were, still experiencing homelessness. So there are some documentation requirements there. I want to do a couple of knowledge checks, with this. So, if something is a support service only project, so a COC funded program is providing outreach, case management, and housing navigation. The same agency operates a rapid rehousing program on a different grant, but is referring some of their support services only participants to that rapid rehousing program. Is this project currently operating as support service only? If folks want to put a response in the chat, that would be great. And I'm going to see if I can't see the chat. So, Catherine, if you want to, navigate any of the
Yeah,
responses.
there's no responses yet.
Okay. Well,
One response is no.
yes. All right. So, yes, it depends. This is a high risk, scenario. So support services funds cannot be used to serve participants that are also providing, where the recipient or subrecipient is also providing housing assistance. So for compliance, there needs to be really clear separation of the participants, the funding streams, and really clear documentation that these are two separate programs that are operating. If that same participant is receiving housing assistance from the same recipient or subrecipient, that support services only classification could be invalid, especially if you're not clearly delineating that these are two different projects. The other huge compliance issue is that a direct referral into the rapid rehousing program circumvents our coordinated entry system. And that could put your rapid rehousing program out of compliance with, the requirements to participate in coordinated entry. So if you are operating a support services only project and you have other projects that provide housing, having very clear rules around how folks are referred that are engaging through our coordinated entry system. So you will want your support services only staff likely trained as coordinated entry assessors so that you can ensure all of your participants are enrolled in coordinated entry and therefore eligible to be referred into available projects and available units via the coordinated entry system. Some general COC requirements for any project type that is getting funded by COC dollars. There must be an annual assessment for support services. So there has to be an annual assessment of need, and that must be documented. You need to be ensuring that your organization is offering opportunities for participation of people with lived experience of homelessness at the organizational policymaking level, whether that is through a participant advisory council, board seats. COC really wants to see engagement and involvement of folks with lived and living experience of homelessness in those decision-making areas. So if your organization does not have a participant advisory council or other way of getting kind of clear, regular feedback and input from folks with lived experience, that is really something to be looking at prioritizing. Uh, we also have to make sure that programs are following HUD rules on fair housing and equal access. These are things that are not optional. Um, while there may be kind of contradictions with current executive orders, these are still existing federal rules that need to be followed. And finally, there needs to be a clear policy around termination of assistance. There needs to be due process for all participants, that services are not just terminated. This policy needs to be shared with all participants at intake, so their kind of rights and the process for that is clearly outlined, and everyone kind of understands what that process may look like and how someone may appeal. So I want to talk a little bit next around what different support services only projects can look like. So wanting to provide some of the kind of general project design, and then have put together some examples of what projects could look like. So some of the requirements, just writ large, are that a support services project needs to either provide or partner with another provider to offer a variety of services such as job training, employment, life skills. There could be childcare, access to outpatient mental health services, so all of the things that are kind of the eligible cost categories, this project needs to either be partnering or providing those types of services. And we'll get to a list of what those are in more detail. Services need to be tailored to participant needs. So this is not each participant needs to fit into this square box. It's the box needs to be cut and designed around the participant. Um, that is really the core of a lot of our homelessness services is that we are tailoring to the needs of our participant. It's not, one service type fits everyone. We know that that's not effective. Um, Projects may require participation in non-disability related services. That is allowed. So substance use treatment service, employment services, that may be a requirement. It's not required, but it can be something that you write into your kind of participation requirement forms. And finally, we want to see all projects working to connect folks to other mainstream and public resources, such as Medicaid, SSI, food benefit assistance, or SNAP, to see that we are making sure that folks are getting connected to robust and well-rounded access to what they may be kind of entitled to be accessing. So for the annual required assessment, this has to review participant service needs to ensure that the kind of the plan and how programs are working with individuals is a living thing, living and breathing, and that things can be adjusted annually as needed. And annually is the bare minimum. Many programs will do this on a 90-day basis. Some will do it biannually just to ensure that, goals are being worked toward. Goals may shift and change, and really just want to make sure that the services and support that a household is receiving is remaining appropriate for their needs at that time, and that there is a housing focus of how are you working and how are each of these goals moving to obtaining and accessing housing. So another little knowledge check. A participant has been enrolled in a support services only project for 2 years. Their service plan has not been formally updated since their intake. Is this compliant? And I'll do a pause if anyone wants to enter a response in the chat.
There's multiple
No.
responses. All of them are no.
You are correct. No. It must be done annually, so that there can be a kind of clear review of goals and progress and how things are evolving and changing. So some compliance tips to calendar annual assessments, and really ensuring to document any changes that the household is experiencing, or if there's a justification for no changes, that's also important and can be done through that annual assessment. We do have some templates from other programs that can be adapted around the assessments for participants. In many programs, they're called housing stability plans, and kind of depending upon your project, how you title that can look different. But we've got a template that's based on a HUD template of a housing stability plan that includes the goal planner and a self-sufficiency matrix. So the other piece is around termination and due process as a requirement for a program. So programs have to have written termination procedures. Those need to include written notice of termination and reason of termination, outline how folks may appeal or request a hearing to appeal, outline how they can present evidence, or have representation to support them, and then the timeline for a final written decision. Note that termination from a project really needs to be a last resort. Um, we Terminations are seen more as negative exits and negative end of participation, where an exit is more of a natural conclusion. So the termination is really something that we want to see as a last resort. We want to see projects really working with folks to remedy whatever challenges there may be. This is also a really big compliance area, where we see projects that may get a finding around not having termination in due process, or not providing the documentation around why or how somebody was terminated from a project, particularly if it was due to a more kind of negatively perceived reason. So ensuring you have really clear processes and documentation for this um, is quite important. So I've put together a few examples of what a standalone support services only project can look like, to either get your kind of brains moving, or even be like, oh, I never thought of that project could be considered support services only or standalone. Maybe we could apply for COC funding to support this project that's currently operating. So the first example put together is a project that is offering either just day services or could be like a navigation center. And separating this from the DESC Navigation Center, which was a shelter, but having this kind of be a one-stop day service area. The target population could be for sheltered and unsheltered adults. This is just an example. The services provided in this project would include case management, benefits advocacy, employment assistance that could be through applying for jobs, resume building, creating a resume, writing cover letters, could offer showers, storage, coordination, referrals to shelter or other housing projects, referrals to coordinated entry, and transportation assistance to medical appointments, to job interviews. The allowable costs for this type of project could be leasing of a service facility that would be allowed under support services um, for the everyday operation of that facility, the utilities and maintenance at that facility where the day services are being provided, case manager salaries, and then supplies that are being used in service delivery. Um, this is a support services only because the facility is providing only support services. It's not necessarily providing shelter or housing. So it's very clear that this is it's a drop-in center. It's a day service center where the services are being provided. The next type of project that could be support services only would be behavioral health support services. So this could be a project that is focused on individuals with mental health or substance use needs. The services that could be provided in this project or at this site could be outpatient substance use treatment, mental health counseling, case management, and coordination with housing providers. So perhaps you are um, uh, working with a housing provider to get documentation completed for someone to move into a housing unit. That could be done within this project. An important rule is that outpatient treatment only. So this would not be a site that would be providing inpatient or residential treatment, but really it's providing that outpatient treatment and support. So they are not um, in staying there regularly, but going in to receive services. And again, this is a project that is not, it's supporting housing stability, but it's not including housing assistance. So this is not a housing program. It's really there just focusing on those support services. Another project type that could be funded with support services um, would be employment and income stabilization. This is a project that would really just be focusing on job readiness, employment counseling, resume development, transportation to interviews, and then general case management. This project would be support services only, as it's really focusing on income stabilization as the core support service. It's not a housing program, but it's working with folks who are experiencing homelessness to gain and seek employment and really being tailored to um, increasing job readiness and increasing employment skills and access. Another project type that could be done as support services only is a family support services project focusing on families with children. And this could be a project that is focusing on case management, is offering childcare. This could be the childcare offered while the parents are attending appointments or going to job training or doing resume development. It could also provide educational services for adults. So whether there is a GED program that is going on or English language learner classes, all of these could be offered by this project. There could also be transportation to job interviews. It could provide food assistance. So there could be grocery cards that are provided or um, meals for kids while they are um, being offered childcare. Those could all be things that are supported through COC funds in this type of a kind of family support services project. And again, this is really focused on family stability, and it doesn't include housing or rental assistance, but really just focused on those stabilizing services. The next would be a housing navigation and stabilization project. So this could be for homeless individuals or families who are actively seeking housing, and have services that are very targeted on housing navigation. So doing housing search assistance, do tenant counseling, talking about landlord-tenant law, um, rent payments, budgeting for housing expenses, doing landlord engagement as well. Um, in a way, doing some kind of landlord liaison and landlord relationship building, as well as some education to landlords around tenant landlord laws and working with folks who have previously experienced homelessness. Can also be focused on application assistance and doing move-in coordination. So kind of scheduling move-ins, helping folks to physically move their belongings. So one of the allowed costs is moving costs. So this is cost to get a rental truck, boxes. You could pay for some storage fees, and then moving belongings into a unit would be an eligible cost. So this is a support services as staff would really be assisting participants in obtaining housing, but the project is not paying rent, deposits, or any leasing costs. It's really all of those like pre getting housing tasks up until moving in and getting your belongings or things into a unit. The next would be medical respite support. This would be non-residential. So this could be a project that is focused on working with folks who've been discharged from hospitals. Um, again, it's not residential, so it would not be longer term stay, but it could be working specifically with folks who've been discharged from a hospital with case management, with transportation to ongoing medical appointments, work to do coordination with healthcare providers, and benefits enrollment. So this could be a project that's really targeted on providing some aftercare services for folks who've been experiencing homelessness. Um, so perhaps there's someone who's been discharged and is staying at a shelter. This could perhaps fund um, a support for that individual who's staying at a shelter, and they could be, referred into this medical respite support service program so that they can get ongoing support to get back and forth to multiple medical appointments, help with keeping track of upcoming medical appointments and coordination if they have both a behavioral health care provider and a primary care provider. This could be a case manager who is kind of a medical advocate in a way and is helping that individual kind of navigate some of that post care follow-up. It's important to note that this would be really just those support services related to health. It's not the residential medical care or inpatient services. So it's really for someone who is, not in a medical care facility, or it's not the medical care facility who is um, doing those services. Because if it's tied to doing those services, it becomes a different project type. Another example is youth drop-in services. So this could be very similar to the kind of family focused services or employment services, but really focused on youth who are either experiencing homelessness or who are also unstably housed. For youth, that's a particular population that is eligible to be served. So youth drop-in services can focus on just general case management, education and employment assistance, life skills training, transportation to and from medical appointments or job interviews, or even kind of housing viewing appointments, and then providing food services. So groceries, providing food at the location. These may be things that are eligible costs and eligible services at a youth drop-in site. And these can be things that are supported with COC dollars. And again, these are services that are provided outside of shelter or housing assistance. So it's really its own standalone project. Uh, Finally, this could also just be like a service hub. So if you have a space that you're using that's not occupied. You could be helping paying some of the leasing costs for a space that is really just a service hub. So leasing for the building that's used exclusively for those support services could support some of the utilities and maintenance of that space, possibly some security costs. Furniture and equipment could be funded for the space that's just doing the support services, as well as staff salaries. And then the services provided could include case management, counseling, employment assistance, benefits advocacy. Really, if there is just a service hub where folks are going to receive those services. HUD allows leasing only to support the service delivery of support services. So no housing units could be funded in this if you're wanting to support the lease costs of this space. It really has to be very clearly delineated that the only services happening at that location are related to the support services only project. So this can't be like a multi-purpose space that, maybe in the day it's a day center and at night it's a shelter. Those would be costs that you have to really be clear around, the prorated amount that's being used to lease the space. It has to only be connected to the supportive services. I'm gonna take a little breath for myself. Um, and a note that we'll review questions at the very end. So I will move through this and then we will get to all of the questions that you guys are sitting on or putting into the chat. So the eligible cost categories that can be requested for supportive services include supportive services. So supportive services is both a program component and a cost category. And that can be a little bit confusing sometimes. HMIS costs, and then project administration costs. The eligible costs for support services um, include services that are focused on program participants' ability to obtain and maintain housing. So there has to be some connection around how the service is supporting a participant to either obtain housing or maintain housing. Grant funds can only be used for the specific services listed in the COC interim program rule. And then this part is not always clearly noted in the program rule, but some of the eligible and costs include not just the direct provision of services, but the cost of labor, supplies, and materials, and then the salaries and benefits for those staff who are delivering the services. So the program interim rule includes a limited number of services or limited types of services. So up here, these are all the eligible cost categories under supportive services only. Assessing service needs, moving costs, case management, childcare. I will not read all of them, but they are both linked in the program interim rule. And there is a virtual binder that has kind of what these services are at a glance. Um, KCRHA also has eligible cost checklists that include a little more detail around what each of these categories means and what types of costs may be covered with each of these listings. So what do we mean by mental health services? What do you mean by outpatient health services? Those are detailed a little bit more in the interim rule, in the at a glance virtual binder, and in the KCRHA cost category checklist. So some additional costs that are not as like clearly spelled out but are allowed are costs related to the everyday operations of a facility or a building. So if the services are delivered in a facility that's not contained in a housing structure, you can use support services costs and the support services cost category to pay for the day-to-day operations costs. So phone, internet, printing costs, etc. Maintenance and repairs to the facility, building security costs, furniture, utilities, and equipment. These are eligible only when it's tied to the delivery of services. So if the facility is being used to offer these services, to house where people are accessing these services, then you can bill these costs under the support services budget line item. Grant funds can also cover the salaries and benefits for staff who directly deliver these services. It can also help pay for contracted services. So if you are contracting with another provider, say your program is directly focused on job training, but you wanted to contract with someone to provide childcare for folks when they are going on interviews, you can use the grant funds to contract the childcare. There are some responsibilities regarding monitoring when you are subcontracting, but you can use those COC dollars to do so. Overhead costs related to support services are also eligible and can be billed as indirect costs on your support services line item. Um, in line with 2 CFR 200 404, any costs, so staff or contracted services, must be reasonable, allocable, and directly tied to the support services. And the contract, if you're contracting, must be for eligible services only, and it has to comply with COC and federal procurement requirements. So this has to do with procurement and bidding in terms of determining who you will be contracting with. Project administration is a separate line item from support services. This is eligible for all project components, and up to 10% of the grant that is awarded can be used for project administration. A note that for grants that come through KCRHA, KCRHA does hold 5% of the project admin. Of that total 10%, we hold half of it. That will support the work that KCRHA does to apply for the grant, monitor the grant, work with HUD, and all of kind of our responsibilities. So we will hold a portion of the project admin fund. For new project budgets, we have already created a formula that will automate what that project administration budget is based on what your direct costs are. So based on what your support services costs are, we will auto calculate the project admin to add on to the award. Project admin funds can be used to conduct general management, oversight, and coordination related to the grant, training on COC requirements or attending HUD required trainings, and then reporting. So all of the tasks related to those three pieces should be billed to project administration. Other overhead costs or staffing costs related to the project, whether that's indirect or direct, should be charged to the specific budget line item. So if you have overhead costs specifically related to support service activities, that should be billed as indirect under support services rather than project administration. So, a little knowledge check. If a support services only project pays for office rent, utilities, and furniture in a building where staff provide case management and outreach, and the building does not contain housing, is this an eligible cost?
You have yeses.
Yay, yes, that's correct. So yes, the specific conditions need to be met. But yes, the day-to-day operations of the facility not contained in a housing structure are eligible. Um, things, compliance tips, document that the space is solely used for support services, and review that the costs are reasonable, allocable, and clearly tied to service delivery. Well done. Okay, another check, another knowledge check, not service check, my goodness. A support services project wants to use funds to pay for ongoing medical prescriptions for participants. Is this an eligible supportive service?
No responses yet.
This might seem like a little tricky one.
You have
No.
a couple no's.
Yep,
A
seen.
yes.
No, so this is not an eligible cost. So only the services explicitly listed. And while outpatient health services are allowed, medications are not unless it's specifically permitted under the eligible service category. So unless a service is really clearly listed, assume that it's ineligible. And since this is an ongoing payment, um, medications would not be those medication payments would not be allowed. So this is where getting folks in connected with Medicaid or Medicare, getting them connected with kind of low cost prescriptions, connecting with pharmacies around what kind of low cost options they may have, doing that kind of advocacy and work would be permitted and eligible costs, but the payment for the medications themselves would not. All right. Another knowledge check for you all. A support service only project is charging 100% of a program director's salary to the support services grant. The director oversees multiple programs, including housing projects. Is this allowable?
You've got no's.
All right. Correct. So this is very likely non-compliant. So this would be a, whoa, hold on, let's review this. So again, staff costs have to be directly related to delivering eligible support services, and costs need to be proportionately allocated based on actual support services related work. So there need to be likely time studies and clear allocation methodologies for how you are including which staff on a grant. So avoiding blanket salary charges without documentation. You want to make sure there's very clear documentation. So if you have staff who are working on multiple projects or multiple grants, you need to have a clear cost allocation policy that shows how you are accounting for their real-time work. Not just percentages, not just best guess, but need to be able to show the real time that is applied to the grant. All right, we are going to move to some more fun stuff. on requirements at both the agency and program level regarding match, policies, and documentation. Everyone's favorite thing. So match requirements, all COC projects, all projects require a 25% match from non-COC funds. Match can be cash or in kind. Match has to be for COC eligible program costs. So if a cost is not eligible in the COC program, it cannot count as match. So the example that I like to use, COC funds for rental assistance or for support services do not allow for paying off of debt. So paying for rental arrears is not allowed with COC funds. So if you had local dollars, say City of Seattle General Fund, and you pay rental arrears or pay down that rental arrears for someone to move into a new unit, that rental arrears payment cannot be counted toward your 25% match. Um, it's great if your program has those funds and can do that, but you cannot include that payment in that 25% match breakdown. So it has to meet the same costs for the project. The match does not need to align with your specific budget line items, but it has to support eligible COC activities. So, an example could be in your COC budget, you have, you know, 100% of your grant is supportive services. Your match can be project administration dollars, yeah, 25% match. It doesn't have to be just for supportive services. Um, it has to be COC eligible program costs. Um, it's good to have written policies and procedures on how you are identifying match, applying it, tracking match, documenting match, um, to ensure that it's really clearly noted in your program how you are determining and tracking all of that. Because at some point, HUD or KCRHA will monitor and audit for those things. Match contributions do need to meet the Uniform Guidance Cost Principles that are in 2 CFR 200 404 around costs being allowable, reasonable, allocable, and documented. You need to maintain records regarding the source and the use of match contributions. And then cash match has to either be received as revenue, it needs to be spent on eligible expenses, tracked, and then reconciled around what you are reporting out at the close of your grant. So when what is called the annual performance report is submitted, we will work with you to reconcile all your costs because the 25% is based on how much of the grant you spend, not the total amount of your grant. So if you had $100,000 grant, but you only spend $80,000, your match needs to be 25% of 80,000, not the 100. We would love for you to spend all of your money and expend all of it, but if there is unspent funds, what your match contribution needs to be is related to the amount of the grant you spend. In-kind match can include donated property, equipment, goods, or services. Again, it can only count as match if it would be COC eligible if you were to use grant funds, and again, has to align with the cost principles. An MOU is required before grant execution can occur. So you do have to have a fully executed memorandum of understanding that has the commitment, the service type, the hourly value. Services need to reflect market rates, and then service hours would need to be tracked and retained for monitoring and review. So maintaining those records is important. It can't just be the MOU. There's some follow-up that has to happen as well. As you're thinking about just policies and procedures, particularly around eligible costs, thinking about reviewing your project and like the application that you are wanting to put forth, the list of eligible costs and your expenses, seeing what costs you would use for the COC grant versus COC match, um, and then how would you use any non-COC dollars that you may have that go beyond 25% match, and kind of determining and putting that into a policy. Then having a procedure around internal controls to ensure that costs really are eligible and that you are have documentation to support why you have those costs in your program. Um, you also will then have to have that supporting documentation, employee timesheets, pay stubs, leases, receipts for eligible items. All of those need to be kept and maintained for review and for record keeping. As you are creating or just reviewing existing policies and procedures, ensure that there is consistency and fairness around how your project is operating, um, that you're meeting regulatory requirements, and knowing that there are kind of two lanes around policies and procedures that may be required. There may be overall organizational level policies and procedures that you need of how your organization is operating, and then how the program itself is operating. And this may include participant documentation and other record keeping requirements for that particular program. So some of the required policies that you will need include project intake and eligibility. So how are you determining if someone's eligible for the project, and how are you documenting homelessness, for example? HMIS, how you are gathering data, inputting data, updating data, your project requirements, your termination policy, participant file record keeping. This is a list of just a number of different things that may be required for support services only. Not all of these are required. Really, it's eligibility, services provided, assessment of services, and then proof of due process. Eligible costs in maintaining supporting documentation, and COC match tracking. Again, for the program documentation requirements for support services only, there's really four main areas. That's the homelessness status upon for eligibility, termination of assistance notice and due process, case plans and services provided, how you're tracking those things, and then the annual needs assessment. So those are kind of four key documentation areas. So next, I want to talk a little bit about HUD rules relating to HMIS and coordinated entry. And just to note that standing federal regulations apply. So first is the equal access rule. All programs need to comply with the HUD equal access rule. That is regarding access regardless of gender orientation, gender identity, or marital status. That participants are placed into to programs that are in accordance with their gender identity, not in accordance with their sex assigned at birth. Programs need to have policies and staff training. There is an equal access training on our website that was conducted last year. While there may be executive orders in contradiction to the equal access rule, the equal access rule still exists. It's still written into the CFR. And KCRHA still expects providers to abide by these rules that are in existence. This is a kind of overall and general rule with HMIS and coordinated entry. HMIS is the Homelessness Management Information System. This is the database that we use to track and collect all of the services that are provided with public dollars. So all programs receiving COC funding must enter data into HMIS within noted timeliness standards, collect universal data elements and program-specific elements, For DV participants, those individuals are de-identified and entered into kind of a mirrored system that has some higher level protections. And all projects must participate in coordinated entry. Again, there's a separate system for DV specific programs. But through there, you need to accept referrals through coordinated entry, follow the prioritization rules that our system has set, and then document compliance with coordinated entry. And a note that HMIS and coordinated entry compliance can be frequent monitoring issues. So these need to be really clearly noted and detailed on how you do that, when you do that, and what your process is. HMIS participation, this is kind of just very high level. Um, but so HMIS again is our system where we track all of the services provided. And a note that this is not a system to track people, it's to track services. That's really the core component of this system. But we look at all projects that need to participate. Participation supports federal reporting, system planning, and performance measurement. So it really gives us an idea of how is our system performing? How are the projects that we are funding performing? Data needs to follow HUD, state, and local HMIS data standards. These are published online through BitFocus. That is the holder of the database. The universal data elements, so name, date of birth, social security, um, gender, race, are all required for participants. Again, if it's a DV participant or there are other, someone refuses consent, those will be de-identified, but certain information is still collected. The program-specific data elements are based on your project type. Those are already pre-written into HMIS. So depending upon your program setup, there will be required questions that you will need to be answering upon entry, service provision, exit, and the annual assessment. So those will be kind of pre-created for you. We want to see that project entry, updates, and exits are done within a required time frame that's detailed in our HMIS data standards, and that we want all users to be following HMIS privacy and security standards. Um, Proper handling of records is also required, and these are tracked on an annual basis. HMIS costs are eligible costs for projects, so you may request HMIS costs to cover the cost of entering data into HMIS. Um, so if you have like one staff person who's entering all the data for your project, that could be costs that are covered through a COC project grant. Again, just reiterating some effective practices. Timely entry, this is super, super important. We want to see things entered as quickly as possible within the system. We don't want to see exits coming in months later because that really impacts our overall performance and how your program is perceived to be performing. So the higher quality your data, the higher quality the review of your program is. We want to see complete and accurate records. So having consistency in your policies on how you are entering enrollments, doing updates, doing exits, looking at your inventory records, having some standards of when and how those are done is really important. Um, Engagement with coordinated entry, so completing assessments, referrals, and getting folks entered into the coordinated entry project. Um, we also want to see security and privacy compliance, that you're securing user access, handling records appropriately, following all privacy and security protocols, and attending all required and annual trainings. Um, KCRHA keeps track of all users in HMIS, and if folks are not attending all the required trainings or getting those in, access will be revoked. So making sure that your staff who are entering and engaged with HMIS are following those is really, really important. Finally, we need folks to be responsive during the federal reporting season. So there's a number of different reports that are completed, and y'all's input on that is vital to ensure that accurate and timely reports are submitted. This includes the annual performance report, the point in time count, the housing inventory count, system performance measures, the longitudinal system analysis, and other required COC submissions. Common pitfalls that we see with HMIS, including entries or exits that happen long after someone is gone. This creates a lot of knowledge gap. So the sooner you get information in, the better, idea we'll have on how projects are performing and operating. The other area is missing or inconsistent data, or you overusing data not collected or data unknown. Um, we want to see this used in kind of worst case scenario, to ensure that we are having as much accurate information as possible. Privacy and security is another big risk. This includes shared logins, outdated access. So if staff have left, um, and you're not closing their access, storing HMIS data on outside of approved systems or sharing it via email. I will highlight that as one that like do not share HMIS data, especially if there's personal information, is all really important. Um, and finally, there are huge reporting impacts. So hitting a lot of these pitfalls impacts overall just data. So it impacts our system performance accuracy, our overall COC system score and renewal scoring for your individual project, and our COC as a whole. And it impacts HUD monitoring outcomes. So the worse the data, the worse kind of the review of our system. So really being sure that you are having strong, solid data, consistent practices, um, and the core of that is the trust that you build with participants to be collecting data. A majority of HMIS data is based on self-report from participants. Um, and we have really good data quality in our COC, and that just isn't a attestation to the solid relationships that providers are building with folks throughout the system. There are confidentiality requirements regarding HMIS data that's noted both in the COC interim rule as well as VAWA rules and HMIS rules. There can be no public posting of identifiable information. There must be secure storage of paper and electronic records. You need to have written confidentiality protocols and having an emergency transfer plan required under VAWA. KCRHA, as the COC lead, has an emergency transfer plan. So we have that is posted online. For coordinated entry, all COC projects need to abide by our published written standards for household eligibility and screening. Communicate project vacancies, including bed unit or unit-specific information to coordinated entry. That's different for support services only projects. You won't have beds or units. Enrolling households who are referred according to our COC's referral process, and then commit to participating in our coordinated entries, planning, and management activities. Some of the kind of noted areas related to coordinated entry that I want to highlight for you all is our single adult leadership team, our young adult leadership team, and then the coordinated entry committee. This is a committee of the COC board. These are all really great areas to engage in our coordinated entries planning and management. The coordinated entry committee meeting is online. It's happens once a month. And we, love to get engagement from folks in that space. All right, I think this is the last section. Reporting and monitoring requirements. So There are reporting requirements that are noted not only from the COC program rule, but with 2 CFR Part 200, Subpart D. This is just federal reporting writ large. So performance needs to be monitored. This usually is a happening on an annual basis to ensure compliance and achievement of goals. This may be done quarterly or annually. Um, that there are performance reports that are required to be submitted. There are both financial components and performance components that are reviewed. So financials look at accomplishments of spending and cost effectiveness, and then performance include metrics and standards, performance outcomes, etc. So some of the things that we look at are accomplishments versus stated objectives, um, explaining any unmet goals or project deviations, looking at cost allowability and eligibility, and reasonableness is another big thing. There may also be site visits that could be virtual or in person. For the COC program, the annual performance report is a really big one. So this is due to HUD annually, as annual performance report says. Um, and this looks at program outcomes, effectiveness, and looks at kind of progress towards goals and spending. Um, some of the specific outcomes, and this is for all project types, include housing stability and exits to permanent housing, length of stay with a program, income and employment changes for folks exiting the project, and then returns to homelessness from those engaged in that project who exited to permanent housing if folks are returning. It also asks about some details and performance highlights related to case management, the support services shared, skill development, healthcare access. Um, these metrics are based on the COC system performance measures, and data quality is also reviewed. So they want to make sure there's accurate and verifiable records. APRs are used for program monitoring to identify strengths and improvement areas. They help guide funding decisions when we look at HUD renewals or possible reallocation of funding, and then help us look at system planning writ large to assess kind of community-wide homelessness trends, programs that are seeing really positive program outcomes, ones that, maybe we have a handful of programs that have just really high rates of return from homelessness. The APRs really help us dig into some of those things to understand where we need to be providing more technical assistance, and making some more concentrated like training efforts. For performance expectations, some of the things that KCRHA and HUD monitor include lengths of stay, the exit rate to permanent housing from a project, return rates to homelessness. This is looked at both 6, 12, and 24 months of exit, the number of households that are served by a project, and then service engagement and case plan documentation. All of those may also influence the COC priority list ranking and your renewal scoring for a project during the annual NOFO process. Monitoring and audit. So an audit is usually at a HUD level or state level, and it's a much more comprehensive, detailed review. Monitoring is what KCRHA is really focusing on, and that may be continuous or comprehensive. Continuous can just be kind of a daily review of reporting, monthly review of reporting and invoicing. And then a comprehensive review is when we look more at your agency policies, your client file documentation, and COC projects must be monitored annually. Audits can be both financial and compliance components. An audit can just be a financial audit. It can just be a policy audit. So it can kind of shift depending upon what the core focus is for that particular entity. Record keeping, an area that's very important for all projects to look at is 24 CFR 578 1.103. This covers record keeping requirements and documentation requirements, particularly around homelessness eligibility, service assessment, match, confidentiality, and record retention. So really encourage folks to read through this section in good detail. Some final compliance notes as we are getting close to our 12:30. I want to be able to address some of the questions. Support services only provides just that, only services, not housing assistance. Participants must meet eligibility requirements, which is homelessness, currently experiencing homelessness. Only the listed support services in the CFR are allowable. Any costs have to directly support service delivery, and the annual service need assessment is required. Some common pitfalls that we can see with support services only are misclassifying a support services only project, failing to track and document participant eligibility, funding non-eligible services, unjustified overhead costs, not conducting an annual assessment, and inadequate documentation of service delivery. We've also linked a number of additional resources, including the at a glance support services costs eligibility, just general activity eligibility, the support services housing component decision tool, a number of resources related to HMIS and HMIS training, as well as coordinated entry training and the assessor manual. And again, having strong classification and strong clarification of costs leads to just stronger compliance in your project. And I'm going to use a last while to review questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can look at the chat. And I'm first going to quickly go through the chat and then get to any live questions that folks have. So I'm going to scroll up to the beginning. Can there be assistance for hotels and temporary lodging? No, not for a support services only project. There's a question, can an SSO project by one subrecipient provide support services to clients in PSH operated by a different subrecipient? Yes, and those participants need to have been experiencing homelessness in the prior 6 months. So if you are, for example, doing case management, housing navigation in your support services only project, and you have supported this individual to move into a PSH project, and they were experiencing homelessness for 6 months previous to that move-in, you can continue to provide some support services to that person in their kind of move-in timeline. I will have to get back and do some looking at if there is a timeline cap for how long you can provide services to the person in PSH. So Catherine, if you can note that as a follow-up, we'll include that. And Jessica, I did see your hand go up in relation, I'm guessing, to that question you put in the chat.
Yes, to ask if there's a cap. So thank you. So if you start providing services to them and then they've been housed for 6 months, do you then have to cut them off?
Yep. So we'll include that in the Q&A follow-up.
Great. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah. The next question I see is for the required annual assessment. Does this need to show up in records in a defined way, or would update changes happen in real time to meet this requirement? So One, they're in HMIS as an annual assessment. So this can be recorded in HMIS and we can clearly see the annual assessment is done. And if you have something that's beyond what's in HMIS, that can be documented and kept in client files. Um, so there is an actual like annual assessment that needs to be done and recorded. Um, you can, there's nothing that will keep you from doing real-time updates and changes, but there is also that annual assessment in HMIS to help meet that requirement very clearly. Yes, we will put copies of the slides and the recording, as well as the Q&A will all get posted online. Would maintenance employee salaries be paid out of the support services? If you are paying for costs for maintenance and there's a clear staff cost related to conducting that maintenance, those costs may be included. You have to just clearly identify that the time of the employee was fully to that project or how much of that time was allocated. So it may be captured either in your indirect or in a part like an FTE that is detailed in your budget. Um, I'm looking at the question. Phoebe, could you expand? Could this potentially be a match fund for something like BFET?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking. BFET, BFET, it's the DSHS program for employment training. We do some social services with it. And a lot of the clients we serve are folks experiencing homelessness. So I'm curious if that would be something that would be eligible for COC support services only.
It sounds like it. Would definitely want to see, need a little bit more detail around the
Mhm.
costs that are being paid, but on its face, it definitely sounds like it could be.
Awesome. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, there's a question of where does RAP fall into COC? So RAPs currently are connected to our support services only coordinated entry project. However, um, other sites or RAPs could be, or housing navigation sites could be a support services only like housing navigation hub. Um, the way that RAPs are funded, they have non-COC dollars that go beyond the 25% match that they're able to use for some diversion costs, so first month's rent, etc., in how those RAPs were designed. So that's kind of how they fit into that area. All right, for a facility that has some housing areas and some support services areas, can we request facility costs in an amount that is proportionate to our SSO work? Yes, you would just need to kind of clearly delineate, likely by like the square footage of like this square footage of the facility is SSO, whereas this square footage is housing. So you need to have something that really clearly delineates how you have determined how much of the costs are being covered with support services versus how much is considered like housing facility costs. What about short-term medications? That one I would also still, this is regarding the paying for medications. If it's not explicitly stated in the rule, um, this is where I would connect with your contract monitor. We can always reach out to HUD to ask if there's specific costs that you're curious about, and we can submit those either to our local field office or projects can submit what is called an AAQ. It's ask a question on the HUD exchange. That's another way to kind of get some further information around if there's specific costs you want to know about. But if there's any questions, please submit those to your contract monitor so we can kind of help determine that as well. Finally, in terms of not finally, next question. In terms of admin costs, if we have a federally negotiated rate, can we use that in lieu of the 10% limit? So these are two different things. So project admin, the cost category, is capped at 10% of your direct costs. So that's the 10%. The total bucket cannot exceed the 10% of your overall grant. That isn't changed. Your indirect rate is different than the project admin. You can charge indirect to support services and to project admin, and your indirect is either the federal de minimis, which is 15%, or if you have a federally negotiated rate, you can use that federally negotiated rate for indirect. So project admin is not just indirect. And indirect can be charged on both project admin and it can be charged to support services. And if you're a rapid rehousing project, it could be charged to operating costs. It can be charged to lease costs. So want to make sure that those are two separate things, project admin and indirect costs. There's a question of what are the chances that programs who previously had match waived would have that happen again? So this is specific to YHDP special activities. So our youth homelessness demonstration projects can apply for special activities. One of them is to have the match requirement waived. I cannot speak to any chances at this moment in time, as what has been is not always what will be. It can be applied for. I think any program applying for COC funding, whether that's for COC writ large or YHDP funding, should plan to need to meet 25% match. And again, the special activity waivers, I can't speak to those and chances. I would say historically, the special activities have been approved that we have requested as long as we have met the required either documentation or required justifications. So we will work with projects to do our best to create very solid reasoning and justification for any special activities for YHDP funds. Which HUD category specifically will make someone eligible for an SSO project only? So the eligibility requirement for supportive services only is currently experiencing homelessness per the HUD definition of homelessness. So that is the eligibility category or the eligibility component. There's no financial eligibility, no income eligibility. It is currently experiencing homelessness. For SSO category 1, category 4, which is the fleeing or attempting to flee DV, and for youth, we have been able to use category 3, which is the at risk. That is all my chat questions. Do you all have any other questions? And to Keith's question, no category 2. So our community and how we prioritize, we do not prioritize right now for category 2 because we have such a large population of folks who are experiencing homelessness. So just for those who are wondering, there are 4 categories of homelessness as defined by HUD. Category 1 is literally homeless. Category 2 is imminent risk of homelessness. Category 3 is homeless under other federal statutes. And Category 4 is fleeing or attempting to flee DV. Our community prioritizes those who meet Category 1, literally homeless, and Category 4, fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence. We are able to use Category 3 for unaccompanied youth under the age of 25 for our youth projects. Category 2 of the imminent risk is not prioritized in our system as we have written, just largely due to the number of folks that we know are experiencing homelessness, so meet category 1 and category 4. Any other questions? Okay, one in the chat. Are there any differences in how the COC evaluates support services only scopes when they operate in hotel settings compared to larger non-traditional facilities? Ooh, I would love if you would come on and expand on that question. Because again, there needs to be a clear delineation that you are not operating out of kind of a housing facility. I am not familiar with other COC funded projects operating from a hotel setting. If you care to elaborate a little bit on your question. Vacant ready warehouse settings. I would want to know a little bit more around the project setup um, to have a good idea of what you're talking about. If you're talking about kind of like a social service hub or a housing navigation hub, um, would want to look at really the project design of it. From my knowledge, there's not really a difference in how we evaluate the program and its setting. It's really mostly around what is this project offering? Is it within the clear delineation of a support services only project? Um, and we have linked in the slides that we'll post the kind of decision tool of, is this a support services only project or is this more of a housing focused project? So that might be a really good tool for you to kind of walk through in determining, does this project fit clearly within the support services only scope? Awesome. Any final questions? We are coming to our time. If you have any others, please send them to coc.questions@kcrha.org. We will also be getting the recording, the slides, and the Q&A online. That might take us until Monday. We just have with people being out for the holiday, but we will get it up online as soon as possible. Thank you all so much for joining us and for the really great questions as well. I appreciate you coming and just listening to my sick voice. So have a wonderful rest of the day and Happy New Year. Here's to a hopefully less chaotic 2026. Bye, all.
I wanted to catch Kelsey before she left.